Hello, folks. It's your friend, the Mass Wrestling Fan. I'm here today because our mutual associate, Mike, has presented me something. He told me he wanted me to open this, and he set up this whole situation for me to come to you today. So here I am, and let's get to it. So he said, Mass Wrestling Fan, I want you to host a very special What's in the Envelope on my YouTube channel. So I said, okay, Mike. And he said, I'm going to set it up for you with some historical information to be at your ready and so forth. So let's see what happens here. Uh, why did he want to send me this? This apparently is all the way from Troy, New York. So we won't hold that against them. Uh, some type of photograph, perhaps. It's taped in an interesting way. I wish I had longer fingernails. I tend to keep my fingernails pretty short. Out of respect to my opponents, I don't want to rake a loose fingernail across their eyeball. So let's see. Mike tells me you folks like to see the inner workings of the tape, that it's some type of fetish for some of you individuals to see the tape come off the packaging. I'm not really sure how that is of excitement to you, but Mike says he gets a lot of social media respondents saying that they enjoy the tape, the packaging. He says he likes the people like this, the sound of it. All right, let's see what we got here. Oh my God. Okay. Well, it is January. The football playoffs apparently are underway. Of course, I'm not the masked football fan. I am the masked wrestling fan. Let's see what happens here. Okay. So let's see what's in this. Okay. Oh, very, very interesting. Looks like we have a wonderful photo here of a fantastic Intercontinental Champion, magnificent Muraco. And it looks like this is actually an autograph photo, autographed by the actual photographer, George Palatino. Wonderful. If I had to estimate, I would probably think, well, this has the Asiatic spike on Morocco's right thumb, so that might have been his second title reign, might have been his first. Oh my goodness, this is fantastic. So we have this photograph of Morocco. Then we have this other photograph of the champion Bob Backlund. Now, for you longtime wrestling fans, you'll recall that for a few years, Bob Backlund, in his final days as WWF champion, heavyweight champion, wonderful. Uh, Magnificent Morocco was the Intercontinental Champion, and Bob Backlund was the WWF Heavyweight Champion. And as a matter of fact, perhaps that's why Mike set this whole thing up for me. I will have to frame these. Thank you, Mr. Troy, New York, for this wonderful gift. And Mike, thank you for presenting, because this brings me to some memories from my own mass wrestling fan childhood. You see, it was a wintry night, 1983, in the what they would call the Capitol Center, Landover, Maryland, and there was what they called the Metropolitan Blizzard of '83. This was a horrible blizzard. I believe 24 inches of snow. February February 10th through 12th, 1983. You can look it up. Apparently, it's known as the seventh worst snowstorm in the history of the Washington, D.C. area, which is pretty bad or good. And the mass wrestling's fan, young mass wrestling fan at the time, I had insisted to my father, the mass wrestling father, that he take me to see this exciting tag team match, Rocky Soulman Johnson, and S.D. Jones against Ray the Crippler Stevens and Playboy Buddy Rose. Was the scheduled traction match. And there was also a world heavyweight title match between none other than Bob Backlund and the Intercontinental Champion Magnificent Muraco. Jimmy Snuka was scheduled to be on this card against superstar Billy Graham. Now, in the days ahead of the show, because of this storm, all situations and events at the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland were canceled. There was a basketball game, NBA game, the Washington Bullets at the time, now known as the Wizards, I believe. There was a hockey game in that vicinity, the Washington Capitals. And all these events were postponed. And the airlines, the D.C. Dulles, okay, very big time airport. All the politicians, all the world leaders coming through that airport, National Airport, Kennedy Airport, RFK Airport, all the airports were closed. But the show went on at the Capitol Center. The WWF, not wanting to lose money, somehow got their wrestlers to appear, and they had themselves a wrestling show. And believe it or not, the mass wrestling father, who was very environmentally minded at the time, eating sprouts, driving a VFW Rabbit, picked up the mass wrestling fan. His son picked up the mass wrestling friend, a young friend of me, and we all took that VW Rabbit 100 miles from the suburbs of the outlying area to Landover, Maryland, for this wonderful wrestling show. Now let's go back in time and I'll try to remember all the matches. There was a gentleman named Johnny Rodz, some of you have probably heard of. He is instrumental in training the likes of Shane Douglas and Mick Foley. And Johnny Rodz was in the opening match, defeating a very young Curt Hennig. Okay? So Curt Hennig, before he went over to the AWA, before he started winning matches, was actually kind of a young rookie wrestler for the WWF. He did show a lot of potential and promise. He got a few drop kicks in on people, but he tended to lose a lot of matches as a young rookie. And here he was losing to perennial opener Johnny Rodz. And Johnny Rodz, you might remember, had that wonderful lightning bolt on his trunks. The next match featured another young wrestler who came into his own maybe 10 years later, 12 years later. A young man who left us far too soon, but Eddie Gilbert, before he was Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert and before he was off trolloping with Missy Hyatt and the like, Eddie Gilbert was at this show as a young wrestler going toe-to-toe with kind of another preliminary gentleman named Charlie Fulton. Now, a lot of you folks remember some of the better-known undercard wrestlers of the time, the Mario Mancini's and the Pete Doherty's, the Duke of Dorchester, but a lot of folks kind of forget just a couple of years earlier, there was a really hard-working wrestler named Charlie Fulton who actually was quite good in some of the smaller, the territory days, the Carolinas and so forth. But Charlie, here in Landover, was there basically to put over good old Eddie Gilbert. Charlie Fulton had a nice beard, a nice head of hair. Kind of looked like if you took Michael P.S. Hayes and mixed him with a mechanic, you'd have Charlie Fulton. But Eddie Gilbert, the Whiz Kid, as they called him back then, was able to win that match. The next thing, I cannot recall this match very well at all, but a couple of guys at the time, Pete Sanchez defeated Baron Mikhail Sakula. Now, Sakula, in a previous generation, was a main event wrestler, but here he had a cape, and that was about it. He was just a big guy at the tail end of his career, putting other guys over, and good old Pete Sanchez defeated Baron Mikhail Sakula. Well, so far we've had a couple of youngsters, Gilbert and Hennig, who had potential but weren't quite there yet, not by a long shot. The card picked up a bit with the fourth match. Mr. Fuji, I do recall him with his Asian salt always very ceremonial. He was supposed to be wrestling Salvatore Balemo. Balemo could not make it all the way from Italy in that horrible snowstorm of 1983. So they actually broke up a tag team match. I think the Strongbows were scheduled to be in tag team action that night. They broke them up and they put Jules Strongbow in there with Mr. Fuji. Now, I want to say that at the time, the Strongbow brothers had just defeated Mr. Fuji and Mr. Saito for the WWF Tag Team title a few months earlier. So this was a little bit of a revenge possibility for Mr. Fuji going against the younger Strongbow, Jules, and Mr. Fuji with his Asian salt, which was always a big thing for the crowd. The crowd always liked seeing Mr. Fuji throw his salt in the air, a big puff of salt. Very exciting, and Mr. Fuji won the match. Apparently, Samoan Sika was supposed to be in attendance, and he didn't make it either because of this horrible snowstorm. So they put in a guy named Bob Bradley. Bob Bradley was a wrestler who a few years later had some success in World Class Championship Wrestling around 1988. But Bob Bradley was a guy, a very muscular young man, who never really seemed to reach his full potential in the WWF. Like I said, he did have some good a year or so run in the World Class Wrestling years later. But Bob Bradley, very muscular young man, but he came up short on this night against Tony Garea. Tony Garea was very well respected at this time as a former multiple-time tag team champion. He had teamed with Haystack Calhoun. Kind of a big guy, small guy team. Haystack Calhoun, who had the horseshoe. Everyone remembers him of that era. Garea and Martel, that was probably Tony's last successful tag team just a few years earlier, right before the mass wrestling fan became a wrestling fan. So by the time I got to start seeing Tony Garea wrestle, he was kind of on the tail end of his thing, but still well respected, still could win a match once in a while, and he defeated the young Bob Bradley. I think they might have even shooken hands before and after the match, which is always nice. Then we had another match. The former Intercontinental Champion, who had recently lost the title to Magnificent Don Muraco, Pedro Morales. Still very popular, very successful, Mr. Everything in the World Wrestling Federation, they used to call him, because he had the Intercontinental title. Before that, he had the tag team title for just a day. Him and Bob Backlund actually defeated the Samoans, I believe, on a Shea Stadium card. A big, I think it was the undercard of the Zbyszko Bruno cage match. I think that's the one where Backlund, the WWF champion, and Pedro won the tag team titles from the Samoans, but they had to give them up immediately because Backlund was already the world champion. But in any event, Pedro Morales on this show defeated Swede Hansen. For those who may or may not remember Swede Hansen, he was a veteran, probably pushing 50 years old at this point in 1983. He had done really well in tag team matches in the Carolinas. In the WWF, he was an interesting case study because he was technically what they might call a rule breaker, a bad guy, but the fans took a liking to him. And with that in mind, the fans started cheering Swede Hansen to the point that it couldn't be denied. And eventually the WWF got behind big old Swede, and he had some good babyface matches. But here he was as a heel, getting defeated by Pedro. The next match on the show turned out to be a bit of a disappointment. And at the time, I do recall that Jimmy Superfly Snuka seemed to disappoint me every time I saw him as a young fan. He would, about 6 months after this show, I would see him have a disqualification match against Don Muraco. That was very unclimactic. A little bit after that, I saw him wrestle Sergeant Slaughter to a double count out. That's all Snuka. And on this match, Jimmy Snuka and the former WWF champion superstar Billy Graham, who was kind of just coming off losing a series of matches to Backlund. So superstar Billy Graham gets put in there against Snuka. Should have been a nice, easy victory for Snuka of some kind, but he gets a cheapo count-out victory. I believe the two men were fighting on the outside of the floor, exchanging forearm smashes, when Snuka did a nice leapfrog over Graham on the floor and then hopped back into the ring, gets himself a count-out victory. Now, you might be wondering, Mike, Mike, if Mike is out there, I appreciate him putting me on this telecast. You might be wondering, Mass Wrestling fan, uh, how was the crowd? I mean, if this turnout of this metropolitan snowstorm, the crowd was probably 7 or 8 thousand people came out. I'm sure a lot of people had to go through a lot of trouble to get there, and probably a lot of people had purchased tickets could not make it. But the WWF said on with the show, and the show went on. And credit to my Mass Wrestling father for bringing me and the Mass Wrestling friend through this turbulent snowstorm, risking our lives to see pro wrestling. It was well worth it. The next match, in a sense, was the main event. All the marbles on the line. The Intercontinental Champion, magnificent Don Muraco, as stated. Wonderful photograph once again. Magnificent Don Muraco, who just a few weeks earlier had won this title from Pedro Morales for the second time. Here he is challenging the champion, Bob Backlund, who's deep into his title reign. The fifth reign. Is that also signed by Napolitano? Apparently it is. So the two gentlemen are getting that match. Very, very long match. And at one point, Muraco was able to bust open Backlund's head. I think he smashed him against the turnpost on the outside. The blood was a-flowing. The referee came in, checked out the cuts on Backlund's head. And Backlund wanted to continue the match. The month prior, apparently, Backlund was disqualified or counted out against Muraco. So he really wanted to continue. Backlund did. But the referee, because of Backlund's cut, stopped the match on what they called cuts. And unfortunately for Muraco, it's kind of an interesting thing. Winning the match on cuts, Muraco did not win the title. Now, these days, if there was a champion who could not continue in the match, most likely his championship would be awarded to the challenger. But this was something that people maybe don't realize or talk about. In this era, Ric Flair, Harley Race were often getting disqualified for throwing their opponents over the top rope, Flair especially, to save their championships on the DQ rule over in the National Wrestling Alliance. But here, in the World Wrestling Federation, Bob Backlund would either pin his opponent, make them submit to a chicken wing, but if they wanted to stretch things out for a few more matches, a few more months worth of wrestling, Backlund would often lose a match via cuts. And not something that people talk about too often, but it's a true thing that Backlund held on to his title many times by losing on cuts. And so that's what happened here. I think there's actually video footage on Channel 4 NBC from George Michael's Sports Machine coverage of Bob Backlund chasing Muraco back into the dressing room. Capitol Center, folks, was a wrestling venue. Had a very interesting top to the building, as you can see. It was really a great place for wrestling. Back then, people were smoking on the concourse, smoking cigarettes. People were eating hot dogs. This venue, which really serviced, like I said, the Washington Bullets, the Ice Capades, the Washington Capitals, was such a big part of my childhood. The Mass Wrestling fan was always happy to go to the Capitol Center. They had video games on the concourse, food and beverage, all the accompaniments at the time. And it was quite a wonderful place, and it was such a sad day in the nation capital's history when the venue was torn down to pieces. Very upsetting to me that ever happened. I don't think they've ever really replaced it, to be honest with you. They have this MCI Center in downtown D.C. Never got over with me, I'll say that. So, and then finally, the fun match, interesting at the time, Special Delivery Jones was, always losing matches on television, but for some reason he was always well regarded and well promoted in the Washington, D.C. area. And he was put in the final match of the night, the special main event tag team match. Special Delivery Jones and Rocky Soulman Johnson. At the time, folks, believe it or not, they were promoted as the Soul Patrol. And that's several months before Tony Atlas came back into the territory, and he teamed with Tony Atlas, and Tony Atlas teamed with Rocky Johnson, I'm sorry, and S.D. Jones became the odd man out. But here, no Tony Atlas. I think he was still in Georgia Championship Wrestling. It's S.D. Jones and Rocky Johnson really going against a legend, Ray Stevens, one of the best workers of all time, probably top 5. Ray the Crippler Stevens, it would have been nice to see him with his old buddy Pat Patterson, but it was Playboy Buddy Rose. Playboy Buddy Rose and Ray Stevens. And you talk about the wrestler blonde hair of the day. These two gentlemen had it. They had the nice blonde hair. And they were in there against Johnson and Jones. Crowd was partial to Johnson and Jones, perhaps for obvious reasons. And the match went pretty much as you would expected. A lot of hijinks, a lot of cocoa butts, a lot of headbutts. Stevens and Rose using the tag team rope to choke their opponent. I do remember at one point, Johnson and Atlas were working over Playboy Buddy Rose's arm. I'm sorry, Johnson and Jones, damn it. And they were working over Playboy Buddy Rose's arm, and Crippler Stevens tried to get in the ring. Referee wouldn't allow him to get in the ring, and Johnson and Jones did a blind tag. Basically, they tagged without a tag. So S.D. Jones comes to the ring, takes over the armbar. Rocky Johnson goes up behind the referee's back and gives him one of these, a little clap behind his ear to make him think that he tagged him when he did it. So there's quite a bit of hijinks. And I don't recall exactly who pinned who, but Johnson and Jones came out the victor. Now, I do remember that the match was initially supposed to be billed as a 2 out of 3 falls match, but the way that I recall it, they only did 1 fall, probably because they just wanted to get the hell out of there. I mean, if you look at the times on these matches, it's listed that the Muraco Backlund match, for the matches they have the time, 14 minutes and 5 seconds, seemed a lot longer to me at the time as a child, as a mass wrestling child. But really quite a nice time. I think it's one of those things, folks. It may not have been the greatest show of all time, but just the fact that these wrestlers came out in the middle of the snowstorm, the 7th worst snowstorm in metropolitan history. And to my mass wrestling father's credit, he got me and my friend there safe and sound. We saw the entire show, had a wonderful time, and headed back to the suburbs. Just makes you think about things. These wonderful photographs from Mike here on One Pro Wrestling and Sports Fan YouTube channel. I'm going to have to find some type of frame. I have a frame right here. I don't know if it'll fit. If these 2 photographs will possibly fit in this frame. If you have any questions or queries, go right ahead. Now that I'm here, we can actually talk some intelligent wrestling talk. No offense to Mike, but he's so frustrated and animated all the time. Sometimes his passion gets in the way of his sensibilities. But you know me, the mass wrestling fan, I try to keep things in perspective. I try to do things the proper way, the old-fashioned way. Let's see if we can take this special effect. One of those venues, folks, that for whatever reason, the powers that be decided that we no longer needed it. The Capitol Center, Landover, Maryland. I would argue to my mass wrestling grave that that's the type of venue, is exactly what we do need in this world. Now, I do recall that the venue was so far off the beaten path, it was actually a lot of time spent in the parking lot getting out of events, not necessarily getting to the event, but after the event, whatever it was, a lot of times you'd sit and sit in that parking lot for hours. So I'm trying to do this. It's got this, for Christ's sakes, it's got this, this stuff, this skim, I'm not sure what do you call it, some type of protectant layer, some type of thing on the, they try to make things easier for you. They make it harder. Just trying to figure this out. It's some type of foreskin almost on this frame. I just trying to get this thing going. Like I said, okay. I think I got it. I keep my fingernails trimmed so tight to the bone. And this frame actually has a little dent in it. And now there's another, my goodness, another skimmy side on the other side. It's just, it never ends, folks. Just everything you do in life is just so goddamn frustrating. All right, let's see here. Just trying to remove this skim. This, God in heaven. It's just so frustrating. Just trying to remove this horrible skim. I need an assistant. Here we go. I think I got it. My goodness. Just such a problem. Everything's such a hassle, isn't it, folks? My God, look at all this waste. Ugh, gee whiz. Where'd the frame go? Oh, here it is. Let's see if we can assemble this in live time. I appreciate you spending your quality time with me. Looks like neither one of us have anything better to do. Got it. Jesus. You need instructions. Okay. So I wonder if both of these gentlemen will fit into this. They do fit. I would like to center them, perhaps, some regard. Put this as a backing. This just might be the as we say, folks, this might be the rough draft of this process. I might revisit this later when I'm off camera and have better. Are they on the right? So this is kind of nice then. I might revisit this and clean this up a little bit, just so it's a little bit more presentable. Maybe I'll put some name cards in there for the two competitors, Backlund and Muraco. Two guys that really gave you their all. Don Muraco never got that world title reign. He was, but really, as an Intercontinental Champion, he was just dominant. He had matches with the likes of Pedro Morales, of course, Rocky Johnson, Jimmy Superfly Snuka. Well, that looks really good to me, folks. I don't know about you. I mean, I probably will. Well, Morocco's a little off kilter there, so now I have to fix it. You got this mass wrestling OCD. Just nothing is easy, folks. Nothing is easy in this world. I guess I'd have to take some type of tape-like material and tape these gentlemen down, which I don't necessarily want to put tape on the actual photographs either. So I don't know what the hell to do. I mean, how do you tape something without putting tape on it? I mean, God. That's not bad. I think what I may do here is, instead of this Statue of Liberty, I might buffer with just a piece of white paper. God's sakes. If I just put some nice blank white paper in there, it'll kind of even things out a little bit. And I do not want to use tape. I really don't, because I don't want the photographs to be besmirched with tape. When you're a perfectionist like myself, you don't like to do a shoddy job with anything. You like to do things the right way. We are getting a little bit closer to that. This may not be totally perfect, but it's getting there. And maybe there's hope for humanity yet. Who knows? Okay, folks, so now I've I want to make sure I got this thing. You always want to make sure you have your frame properly. You don't want the bottom into the top and all that stuff. I've put the frame, put the picture in the frame, put the frame in the picture. We'll be doing more of these videos. If you have any special topics you'd like me to cover on this channel for my take on things, you're more than welcome to ask. All right. God in heaven. That looks a lot better, doesn't it? Looks like they're pretty much on kilter. Like I said, I might go back later and revisit that. Oh, this, God in heaven. Ugh. All these lights, the reflections. I need a light coordinator around here, for God's sakes. Well, that's it, folks. Well, Backlund and Muraco, two legends doing battle. Oh, thanks, Mike, for your kindness and this very special What's in the Bag. I really enjoyed it. Mass Wrestling fan. Subscribe, idiots. Thank you.